We're next going to bring on our old friend Danny Brager with Nielsen.
Watch what you say about old.
Well, longtime friend, still
like that
spitting, Danny Brager.
Maybe old's right. I'm not sure.
How busy are you these days?
I'm busy. Well, today was good, actually. I got to actually get in a car and drive for an hour and be here as opposed to get on a plane and fly across the country. So it was cool.
Yeah, and
that's a good thing.
Is the beverage alcohol practice popping at Nielsen?
We're busy. Lots of. I often say, I mean, we measure 125, 130 different categories. I have the best one because there's always something going on, and it's fun and exciting. Lots of challenges, opportunities every day. Yep.
So we had the opportunity to hear from the economists earlier in the day, and I think they were using most of your slides anyway. But what I'm wondering is where we are. If you can give us a quick update on where we are at as we end the year with craft and also with its competing components.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably a lot of the data that Bart and Lester were using, like you were saying. But I think where we're going to end up is that wine and spirits are growing on volume about somewhere between 2 and 3%, whereas beer is pretty flat on volume. And you know, that's been a continuation of that long-term trend of beer losing volume share-wise.
Yeah, I mean, for a long time, beer was just losing. It wasn't even flat. It was losing volume year over year.
A little bit. It's been, I mean, the craft thing has been good. The high end has been good for beer. But what I think has amazed me is I'm not terribly surprised that as things mature that certain segments slow down, and, you know, we're seeing that with craft. But to me, it's the pace of how quickly that's happened. Because when I look at, say, the data from a year and a half ago, I'm looking at pretty strong increases still for craft.
Yeah.
But then I look at like just the last 3 months, and I was just looking at it the other day. Out of the top 100 brands, 75 of them aren't growing as fast just the last quarter versus what they were a year ago. That's a lot. That's slowed down.
Is it that they're running out of pipeline to fill?
I think it's a lot of things. In some markets, it's just that level of penetration is already really high. It's like, can you? And I see that with all sorts of other things. It's you can get to a certain point, and then that segment gets really, really big, and it's hard to keep it growing at that level.
Yeah.
But there's other things too. It's brands that are filling in their distribution pipeline. Once they're growing because of distribution in some cases. Then when they got it, then it's another challenge. How do you keep growing?
So you got same store sales instead of pipeline fill, and that's, we see that across all CPG is, can you sustain your customer? And but I wonder if there's anything in the numbers that seems to indicate that it's a particularly hard thing for craft brewers to maintain branded same store sales, given the amount of variety that's out there.
I think the industry is going to have to work a lot harder on innovation and finding, you can't ride the same pony forever. You've got to branch out, number one. And then number two, I think the industry, and I think there are opportunities, but I think the industry and some of the folks this morning talked about it, like look at pockets where you're not as well developed. Look at pockets where wine and spirits are doing a better job. There were some great presentations from a couple of the startups about connecting with the Latino consumer who's growing in importance, but frankly, the craft industry hasn't done a great job of that.
Yep.
Connecting with the female consumer, 50% of people out there, you're going to have to find spots where maybe we haven't been before that we're going to have to be.
Although, to be fair, most of these brewers have trouble connecting with females to begin with.
Yeah, look at the number of females at the conference. But but in order to, that's where say wines, and they've got an advantage, right? They're much more gender equal.
Yeah.
It's tougher for beer, but you got to do it or try.
I would argue to you that one of the reasons that we're seeing this topping out is that while the concept of craft beer is maturing and has sort of occupied its current market plateau, the brands within craft beer aren't as mature as they could be, and they aren't starting to create that level of dominance and traditional category play that you see in other CPG?
Well, I think that's partly inherent in this category that's so much more fragmented than say spirit. It's part and parcel of what makes craft so special, right?
Yeah.
That it doesn't have that brand dominance and so on. So I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but in order for any brand, whether it's a craft brand or not, to keep growing, you're going to have to figure out ways to appeal to a consumer, appeal to new consumers, appeal with different styles, whatever it takes.
So I want to follow up on that, because you're pointing to something that I think is really interesting, and that is a real fundamental shift in how people look at beer. And are we going to see further declines in the beer mega brands as we go further? I mean, is that so? If Total Beer has topped out, is there still running room for craft as that ongoing generational decline takes place?
I think potentially. I was looking at some of our data. I'm not totally a data geek, but once in a while I take a look at some of the numbers. So it was interesting.
Well, you have people to do that for you.
I do it myself. It was sort of interesting that the high end of wine and the high end of spirits is about 60% of the category. The high end for beer, if you include craft, imports, everything, it's about 45%. So the gap between...
And that's stretching it in terms of what you're defining.
Well, yeah. I put, domestic high-end premiums, I put craft. I mean, put a lot of stuff in that, but I still only got to 45. That's a 15-point gap versus the high end of wine and spirits. There's opportunities there. I think the beer industry is probably going to have to figure out, historically, for instance, that as consumers got older, and Lester was showing some data about, consumers are getting older, right? That people have generally, that historically has meant a shift more towards wine and spirits than it is to beer. We got to figure that part out.
Yeah.
But there's still lots of markets like where craft. There's some markets where craft is 35 and 40% of the market. There's other markets where it's 15 and 20. Like there's lots of opportunities. You just got to have to look a lot harder to find those and capitalize on them.
So there's still market share to flip to these guys.
I think so.
Do you think that the kind of incremental style growth that we're seeing, we talked about this earlier, is that growing the category, or is that cannibalistic, or is it cannibalistic to beer overall?
Well, if you look at just numbers, and without looking at sort of the inner dynamics of the numbers, if the beer category is flat, but if certain styles are growing, that means that other things aren't growing. So it's sort of suggesting, at least at this high level, that it's not as incremental as we'd like it to be. It's as the category would like it to be, and that's the challenge that I think beer has, especially compared to wine and spirits, because wine and spirits, there is growth year on year, and beer, it's tough to get that same growth.
All right. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. It's great to have you here, and
It's good to be here again.
Glad you had some time to chill off stage
awesome.
And just have a couple of 10 minutes, in the end in the lounge.
No, it's great to be here. It's great to learn, great to network, and great to see you again.
All right. Take care, Danny.
Cool. Thanks.